Thank you. Thank you very much, General. So as we conclude today, as I introduce our final speaker, what should we do, the General says. When we listen to our final speaker, we have someone who has worked to develop U.S. policy with respect to another pariah internationally, and that's North Korea. So Christian Whiton is somebody at the U.S. Department of State who led the efforts to develop a strategic review of U.S. foreign policy as it related to North Korea, also who was pursuing nuclear weapons. And so today he gives us a very unique perspective in how and what lessons we can take from the way we treated North Korea, whether we pursue policies of negotiation, which was done, isolation or sanction, and how those policies shall be pursued with the number one strategic enemy of the United States, as the General said, Iran. So now to give us this commentary is Christian Whiton, former U.S. Policy Director at the Department of State.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, Congressman Kennedy, for that introduction, and it's an honor to be here with such distinguished company to talk about really one of the most severe and serious threats facing the United States, which is, of course, the government Iran and its proxies and the work they do throughout the world. It's certainly been a busy couple of months for the tyrants who govern Iran. As we've heard from a number of people, and as you are all too familiar, we see what Iran is doing in regard to Camp Ashraf with the MEK. You also know, and we heard from Ambassador Joseph and others, that last week the IAEA reported that Tehran has continued to work on a nuclear weapons program. And their findings are unambiguous. It reflected also, this latest report, a dramatic turn for the IAEA, after which no one can credibly say that Tehran is not pursuing a nuclear weapons capability. And as Mr. Benveniste and General King reminded us, a month earlier, the U.S. government disclosed a plot by Iranian agents to kill the Saudi ambassador, to kill an ambassador accredited to the United States right here in Washington, D.C., a plot involving hiring operatives of Mexican drug cartels to strike us here, and a plot that would have possibly included the collateral deaths of congressmen and other notables. And also, General Keane walked us through a litany of other egregious offenses against Americans by this government. These activities probably come as no surprise of those of you who are gathered here. More than 30 years after the revolution that opened its path to power, the Tehran regime continues to use terrorists as instruments of national policy. It's been tireless in seeking to expand its influence around the world, and it continues to be the primary adversary of freedom in the Middle East. Tehran has also been particularly effective at waging political warfare, and that's where I want to focus my remarks, based, as Congressman Kennedy said, on some lessons learned from North Korea and other places where we've sought to help those who are seeking freedom. Political warfare can be defined as the spectrum of national power tools that fall between diplomacy or traditional diplomacy and outright war. The idea is to get a political outcome, to get what a government wants to achieve somewhere beyond its borders, and do so by using means more effective than just talking as diplomats may do, but certainly less costly than going to war. It can involve financial, cultural, military-related, intelligence-related, information-related activities. Tehran understands this. It understands political warfare and has been using this more or less since the inception of the Islamic Republic. And as the main nation-state progenitor of the Islamist ideology, the Iranian government is interested in the export of Islamism, but also in supporting governments that are friendly to its many nefarious ambitions abroad. I think it's an important element to grasp for policymakers in the United States. By necessity, analysts here do focus most of their attention on the Iranian nuclear program. It's obviously an issue of extreme concern, and it's a national security challenge for which neither the current administration in the White House nor its predecessor has developed adequate policy. But I believe from the perspective of U.S. security, the greatest likely threat is actually not a possible Iranian first strike or the proliferation of a nuclear weapon to a terrorist network, either of which would be suicidal to the regime in Tehran. But frankly, a greater threat, or a more significant one, is in the added impunity that a nuclear arsenal would provide the regime to engage in subversion and the other activities at which it has proven itself so adept. So unfortunately for us, a nuclear breakout would be, I think, a windfall for the Tehran regime at the very time when it should otherwise be feeling particularly insecure about its future. Outside of Iran, Arab Spring shows us the limited appeal of clerical rule as practiced inside the Islamic Republic. It has again exposed the lie that residents of the Middle East do not desire freedom and accountable government in the same way as we do in the West. It should again signal policymakers in Washington and allied capitals that in the Middle East there is not just a choice between dictators and strongmen on the one hand and the Islamists on the other. In fact, there is a wide body of reformers, liberals, moderates, call them what you like, that wants to constitute, or that constitutes a more liberal alternative to what we have seen prevail in so many parts of the Middle East these last several decades. And then, of course, there's the movement inside Iran, which you know represents a new and broader level of intensity in the opposition to the incumbent government. Together, these constitute building blocks that could roll back Tehran's reach and promote the decay of the regime from within. History has essentially now provided us with an opportunity to take friends away from the Iranian regime and expedite its decline right at home. So it would be sadly ironic if, at the time when the Iranian government should be fearing for its longevity, a nuclear breakout were to give the regime a new lease on life and allow it to do more of what it already does, but with added impunity. We have seen a preview of this already. As I've said, Tehran is quite adept at political warfare, and of course you all know this. Through various means, Tehran and its proxies, its allies, have managed to use political transitions and what some saw as the dawning of democracy in various places to undermine democracy. Recent examples include governments compromised by Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas and the Palestinian Authority, and by the Sadr bloc and its fellow travelers in Iraq. In each case, Tehran has done yeoman's work in using democracy to poison democracy. And that won't be the end, especially if a nuclear Iran intimidates our allies and perceives a new lease on life at home. We should reasonably expect Tehran to attempt repeat performances as other political transformations occur. Seminal elections are on the horizon in Egypt, in Libya. They just occurred in Tunisia. The battle between reformers and Islamists is going to take place, is taking place, and is likely to be the major political feature of this decade. So my suggestion, of course, is that free nations fight back. We should counter political warfare with political warfare. We should push back on Tehran using peaceful means if possible in order to advance our national interest in expediting the internal decay of the regime, as well as helping those in Iran who share our values and our desire for a civilized order. This is something at which the U.S. used to excel. During the Cold War, we helped indigenous political movements and indigenous voices appeal to their countrymen to defend freedom or to free nations being held captive. The bad guys were helping their friends, so American presidents of both parties thought it was important that we help ours. Perhaps the most active in this were the Democratic president at the beginning of the Cold War, Harry Truman, and the Republican president near the end, Ronald Reagan. So what would be peaceful political warfare against the current Iranian regime? Some features, we've heard some very good ideas incidentally, but some features could include, first, helping dissidents inside Iran and free Iranians outside of Iran, such as yourselves, with communications tools and other resources that are critical to any political movement. We can also link them with others who have dealt with political organization in repressive situations before, especially those who did so in the Eastern Bloc behind the Iron Curtain in the 1970s and 80s. Secondly, we could apply stronger financial actions against banks and other companies that do business with the regime, including the likely fatal blow of fencing the banks off from dollar-denominated transactions. Actions like this put a major crimp on North Korea's money operations in the last decade. And unfortunately, they were turned off, but extremely effective while they existed. Third, we could make the disruption of telecommunications work for those who are actually seeking freedom rather than those who are working against it. It's almost certain, as General Keane alluded, that Tehran has employed cyber warfare against us, including assaults on tools like Twitter. The free world could return the favor by identifying and empowering the friendlies who can turn activities like this back on the regime, especially at moments of democratic opportunity when political turbulence erupts. Fourth, let's take similar nonviolent steps to help the Syrian opposition in close coordination with our Turkish and Jordanian allies who've been very good on this. A free Syria would deny Tehran of its best ally and deeply impair its communications with Hezbollah and other regional Islamists. Fifth and last, while the main point of political warfare is that it's not real warfare, it's nonviolent, it nonetheless is either augmented or undermined by military posturing. Tehran is undoubtedly pleased that U.S. forces will depart neighboring Iraq by the end of the year. We should look for ways to offset this loss of capability so that Tehran is no better off. I should note in closing that we lack many of the capabilities to do what I have described today. Tools like the U.S. Information Agency are long gone. Our intelligence agencies are long out of the business of concerning themselves with foreign political outcomes or directly influencing those outcomes. The CIA seems to be on its way to becoming a second Air Force, and our taxpayer-funded instrumentalities, originally meant to support liberal ideals in governance, like the National Endowment for Democracy, do precious little today to support frontline dissidents, like those working for freedom inside Iran. But especially as the efforts of the current and the past U.S. administration to talk Iran out of its nuclear program founder, and amid the inspiring demand for freedom and on display across the Middle East, we have an opportunity to reconsider our approach and improve our policy, just as we have the opportunity now to reconsider our policy toward the MEK and Camp Ashraf. As Winston Churchill once reportedly remarked, quote, "Americans can always be counted on to do the right thing after they have exhausted all other possibilities." So now, I'd say, is the time for us to do the right thing on Iran policy and on Camp Ashraf. So with that, I thank you very much. Thank you for having me today.
Thanks, Christian.